people have gotten the impression that I'm a little obsessed with Jane Austen just because I have a few books and I read Pride and Prejudice every year. And I may or may not have my picture taken with a particular shirt that's a little bit famous. Well, I'm so excited that Dr. Helena Kelly will be joining us on Royals, Rebels, and Romantics to talk about the secret radical that Jane is. Not quite the sweet author we have been led to believe in some cases. So sit back and enjoy a new look at Radical Jane. Welcome, everyone, to Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. I'm Ann Lloyd, and excuse me, I am here with Dr. Helena Kelly, who is going to share with us some new information, some fun and exciting ways of looking at our favorite author, one of our favorite authors, Jane Austen. So welcome, Helena. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I am so excited to speak with you. On the podcast, we have looked at Jane Austen in a few different ways, including some of the adaptations of her works. But now we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into Jane herself. And she has a very special anniversary this year. Can you tell us a little bit about that? So it's a perfect time.
It does. So on December the 16th, she is turning 250. So yeah, she's the same age, I guess, as America. Yeah, so it's a big year all round. Lots of anniversaries to celebrate. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting coincidence, really, because we have this I find quite strange tendency to still think of Austen's life and Austen's novels as being very kind of peaceful and tranquil, and this, it's just this lovely kind of, beautiful rural landscape, and everyone is like driving along in the big carriages to the lovely house, and it's actually a really turbulent time. Like, it's an era of revolution, it's an era of like huge social change, of all kinds of, cultural and political and, economic, agricultural and technological, innovations coming in, debates about those, kind of arguments about, are these things good? Are these things bad? Are these things, suspiciously foreign and French?
Yes, always French.
Always French, always a very bad thing.
Right.
But, so it's sort of it's actually it's a good time, I think, to kind of stop and take a little deep dive into the world that she's actually living in, and the world that she is actually writing her novels about. And it's not, I think it's often we've kind of been persuaded to see it as something slightly other than what it was.
And I really appreciate your mentioning, for example, because we do have a lot of American listeners, that it is the Revolutionary War. I mean, this is happening during her lifetime. And then the War of 1812 happening during her lifetime. And the Napoleonic Wars happening during her lifetime.
Basically, it's, Britain is at war for, I mean, not quite her entire life, but the vast majority of it. To have this, that's very much, I think, odds with the idea that we have of her life and her novels, right? You have people. You asked me, one of the questions that you asked me was what was the sort of the kind of misconception that I'd like to correct, and it's that people still keep repeating this. Like, it was in the London Times a couple of weeks ago. Oh, Austen never mentioned the war. She did, like, genuinely, she does mention the war. You've just got it into your head that it's not there, even though it's there.
Right.
You have this, but when there's this very famous quote from Winston Churchill. So he's he's ill. I think it's like 1943, 1944, and he's ill in bed, and he gets his daughter to read him a Jane Austen novel while he's kind of recuperating, and she reads him Pride and Prejudice, at his request, in fact. And there's this famous quote where he's sort of, what calm lives they had, these people. Like, no worries about the Napoleonic Wars, no worries about the French invading. And I'm like, you do realise that you're reading a novel which is full of references to the militia and to soldiers. And why do you think they're going to Brighton to train, Churchill? What
Yes.
do you think? Like, they're there because there was a genuine fear, and in fact, I think there were plans for France to attack the south coast. It invade successfully for a time in Ireland.
Mhm.
They attempted but failed to land in Wales. This was a genuine fear. They're not like all that moving of the militia companies
Yes.
around the country. That's not just so that they can dance with various different girls. It's not. It's not.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
for. It's not for decoration and like varying people's
Right.
social lives. It's because the war is on, right? And
Yes.
people are genuinely terrified. Both that maybe the revolution will spread, and even if it isn't, maybe maybe this is going to be the summer that the French invade,
Right.
as they've been threatening to do for a very long time. And so I find it absolutely fascinating that he managed to lie there listening to a book where this. I mean, it's not as if they hide it. It's quite front and center in that early part of the novel, right?
Right.
And yet he seems to have completely not registered that it was there. It's absolutely fascinating. But I mean, he's not. He's very far from the only person to. It's been a
Right.
commonplace for a really long time in Austen crit, but it's complete nonsense, right? I mean,
Right.
take Persuasion. Persuasion starts with Napoleon being confined to Elba, right? That's
Hmm.
that's where it
Hmm.
begins in the summer of 1814, and it finishes the week that he escapes. Like
Hmm.
literally, count out all the weeks. If you work out exactly where we are, it finishes at the end of February, the main action, and that's when Napoleon escaped from Elba and lands in France, and we have the war starts up again. And that's
Right.
not Austen's not. Dude, that's not coincidence. She did know what she was doing. Like it's on purpose. So yeah, she does talk about the war, but she wasn't imagining she was going to be read 220 years.
Right. So she's writing for people in her day who would recognize all that, who probably had seen the militia or knew of someone in the militia and knew why they were moving and why they were training. And all of that is very much embedded. If you look at, for example, as you say, Pride and Prejudice, it's not just that, we're following George Wickham around. We're seeing where the militia is placed, and they go, as you say, to Brighton and to some of those places on the coast. It's not just for a break, it's not for sea bathing. They are going there for a reason. And her readers would have recognized that,
I
right?
mean, it would have been I think so obvious to them that they didn't really need it. They in the same way that we don't need contemporary political and like geopolitical stuff spelled out to us in a novel
Right.
that's set now. Like you could have a glancing reference to, I don't know, like Afghanistan or something that's happening in Africa or the Ukraine, and it would be immediately obvious if you're reading it
Yes.
now, like what the context is, what's being brought in. You don't need to have, and of course, 5 years ago, Russia and that's not, you don't need that in what is a contemporary novel.
Yes.
And she's writing for an audience that has lived through all this stuff as well. Right.
Right. And is living through it.
Yes.
She places this moment of persuasion in a moment of a lull between warfare and more warfare, and everyone knows what's happening. It's like the novels that are set between World War I and World War II, and they're marching right into it. So yeah.
Um,
So let me ask you, with being an Austen scholar, what sort of inspired you? And I'm going to ask, we are starting by talking about your first book. And if you could hold that up so we can take a look. I was mentioning mine is an ebook, and when I hold up the screen, funny things happen. But these are a couple of fabulous. So it's Jane Austen, The Secret Radical. So tell us a little bit about those two covers because I love them both.
so this is the North American one,
Yes.
which is lovely, but I mean a bit more restrained, which I think North American covers tend to be. That tends to be a bit more like it's a bit more kind of I guess like punky. There's more adventurousness in the in British covers, especially paperback ones. But this is the my British publisher brought out a new version of this last year, which looks really lovely, actually. Got a little picture of, hang on, let me bring it up. Austen upside down.
That is wonderful. And it's interesting because that portrait of Austen that's just in the background of the British cover, which is one of the famous ones, is a portrait where they painted a wedding ring on her finger, which of course she was not married. So you can see how her image is
image, right? It's something image because it's the one that everyone recognizes. It's absolutely, you see that, you're absolutely right. This is Austen. I have a rubber duck that has basically that dress and that cap on because, even if you put that on a duck, you can register it that there we go, Jane Austen in duck form. But it's an incredibly kind of iconic image. But yeah, I mean, it's got layers and layers and layers of fakeness to it, essentially. So it's sort of a prettified version of a prettified version of a not very good original. So the one it is ultimately based on is a let's be honest here and say a not particularly good sketch by Jane's older sister Cassandra. And although I suspect it's really interesting, so Chawton Cottage, the Jane Austen Museum, has just had it might still be going on. It's had an exhibition of Cassandra Austen's drawing, and she mostly kind of copied other pictures, and she clearly knew what she was doing. Right, she's pretty good. So I rather suspect that this slightly amateurish sketch, if I'm being kind, it's rubbish. I mean, I know we all have mixed feelings about Cassandra, but I mean, this is not a great work of art. But I strongly suspect that she was doing it without Jane knowing. It looks very much to me like she was sort of doing it on her, given that she clearly could draw properly. I suspect that Jane might very well have been someone who did not like sitting for portraits, because the only other one we have is the painting with her back turned. Yeah, so there's that people have tried to kind of map on to the base, and so they sort of did an engraving of Cassandra's original at the end of the 1860s. There's this family memoir that's published, very, very successful, and they wanted to find a picture of Austen. Let's see if we can make it better, and they kind of make her cap more expensive, and they make her face kind of rounder and more attractive, and softer, more feminine looking. And they sort of they prettify up her dress and make that look more expensive and more kind of chic. And then that engraving then gets used as the basis for the version that we have, this kind of colorized picture that we all know, but bears very, very, very little resemblance. It's kind of fascinating that we have this very firm image, but that's not actually. Well, I guess this is Austen all over. We think we know what she looks like. We think we know who she is. Actually, when you start digging into the family stories and the kind of family background and what the texts are actually saying, you find something quite different. I think.
Well, and that's really interesting because we see it with the stories about her. We see it in her portrait. We see it with the stories about her, including some of the stories her family tells about her that are sort of prettified and fictionalized. We see it in the story of her family that gets, told by others. There are so many layers of making her a different person, or the novels different in their adaptations or in the movies, or 6-part BBC productions or whatever that are made of them. Clearly you adapt and you interpret and you do your own thing.
Kind of completely what you would expect to happen. The interesting thing is that it doesn't seem to matter how many times people point out the reality. There's a certain portion of the audience, certainly, and a certain portion that they just do not want to hear it. And you get this even with quite quite intelligent, well-educated people who are like, oh well, obviously Austen does this. Austen never talks about this. Austen's like, you're not. There was this article in the Times a couple of weeks ago that drove me insane, because it's sort of like, oh well, Austen really didn't know any men. She has six brothers. She grows up in what is basically a boys' boarding school. I mean, it's not a massive school, but her father in students, and they taught them in the house. So she's growing up at any one time. There are like 10 teenage boys around her. The idea that that would result in a woman who knew nothing about men, to whom they were but a closed, mysterious, but like, no, I mean, I'm sorry, I refuse to believe that. It just, of course she knew men.
And she was someone who traveled and she interacted with people. She has interactions with her publisher as time goes on. So absolutely. So what drew you to dig deep into this part of Austen, sort of below the surface and into the secret radical?
Okay, it was quite a slow process. To be honest, I first really got interested in Austen, like many other young and older women, when I watched the 1995 BBC Pride and Prejudice, and I was like, oh, this is this is the TV that I didn't know I was waiting for. And little crush on Colin Firth. Also, just loving, as a teenage girl myself at the time, the fact that it was kind of foregrounding this family of teenage girls. It really delighted me. And so I kind of, I fell face forward into fandom age 14. And then at A level, so at the kind of top of high school, basically, we studied Mansfield Park, and I was like, I think quite a lot of people's first response to Mansfield Park is, oh, it's very, very different to Pride, very different to Pride and Prejudice, right? Even though it kind of, it takes, in a sense, the situation at the end of Pride and Prejudice and then starts again. You have the three sisters who've made these wildly different marriages. What happens to the next generation? How does that same situation play out? But it's so different tonally. The heroine's so different. The whole feeling of the text was, it is a challenging book, I think, actually, to give to pupils at the end of school. Like, it's a very grown up read in a lot of ways, much more so than a lot of Austen's other novels. And so I sort of retreated into fandom again after that for a bit, because I found Mansfield Park very difficult. I found it very. I had a definite sense that I didn't understand it, that I wasn't getting at what she was trying to do there. And then quite a few years went by, and I was working on my doctorate, which was actually about kind of changes in like land use and land ownership and how that gets reflected in literature. So it had lots of stuff in it originally about kind of Ireland and like the unification between Britain and Ireland and how that gets talked about in Irish literature, and had a lot about kind of urbanization, and then the bit that it ended up being all about, which was about the enclosures. So yes. This sort of wholesale reorganization of the rural landscape, essentially, and taking the common land out of common use, and instead turning it over to sort of much more intensive agriculture, and then sticking lots of hedges and fences and barriers generally in, and kind of it was a very kind of alienating experience for people who lived in those areas. And it was a huge amount of land that was kind of switched, and that nearly all happened basically during the Napoleonic Wars, so over a period of about 30 years, at the end of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century. And in fact, the wars were one of the drivers in doing it, because they wanted to produce more food. you know, they were very concerned that they were not going to be able to feed the rapidly increasing population in a war situation. Um, and I suddenly having read a lot of the kind of technical literature about enclosure, I picked up Emma one day to read it just for fun, and I was like, oh, she's right, like all these references. I've got, suddenly it looked completely different to me because I suddenly
Mm.
realised that Highbury has just been enclosed. Like literally, it's very, very, very obvious if you know how people spoke and the kind of language
Mhm.
and references that they would make and the kind of the kind of changes that they would make to the landscape. I'm like, oh right, Highbury has literally like we must be 2 3 years down the line from it having been enclosed. This is what George Knightley is doing. This is why he's out in the fields rearranging styles and paths and things. It's because he is intensively farming this place. This is what he wants to do, and that's why that's why you have the Roma at the side of the road who then come into conflict with passers-by. Traditionally, of course, they would go and camp on the common, and that was very kind of widely tolerated. That was just what
Mhm.
they would come at the same time every year, more or less, and they would stay there for like a week, 10 days, and then they would move on. But because they can't get there, suddenly we're in a very very different situation, and there's conflict where there previously wasn't conflict. And those sort of suggestions of local poverty. You have a couple of families in Highbury who are clearly struggling to kind of feed themselves and so on. And that's all. It's basically an enclosure debate, like in the form of the novel.
Mhm.
And I found out that the area where Emma is set is where Austen's cousin and her cousin's husband lived. She used to go and visit them quite often, although it was a slightly fraught relationship. And the parish right next door to them was enclosed, like just before her last visit there. So which was when she after which she started working on Emma. So she goes there, she visits them, she sees what's going on in the immediate neighbourhood, and then goes home and writes a novel about it, basically set in that area. So she clearly, it doesn't seem like I'm reaching, and yeah, and I was sort of like, oh well, if there is having finished my doctorate, which ended up being kind of just about enclosures, I was like, but did have a chapter on Emma. I was like, well, if she's engaging in such an extensive way and in such a kind of detailed um almost technical way. There's sort of all this is a lot of the things that she's saying, a lot of the language that she's using is quite similar to kind of political debate pamphlets about this big change. Like, is this just an outlier, or is there kind of political socioeconomic stuff in her other novels that I just haven't seen and
Mhm.
that I've been kind of missing all this time? And yeah, as it turned out, there was. But yeah, and it's I think if you sort of having got rid of the idea that she was just bonnets and dances, and which is a very tempting. I can see why people. I mean, I kind of fell for it for a very long time. It's a beautiful kind of very unchallenging view of that part of the past. Um, but yeah, once you let go of that, you can see an awful lot more in the novels. I think much meatier, more exciting. So it doesn't stop some of them being romantic, although I'm not sure all of them are necessarily wholly romantic endings. Um, but yeah, but there is a lot more. There's a lot more to get your teeth into, I think. And she was clearly much more engaged in what was going on than I had been led to believe. Let's put it that way.
Well, and that's very true, because we do sort of fall into the balls and who's dancing with whom and all of that. And that is there, but it is
I
it
mean, suggest that it's not. I mean, it's, it's
Yes.
lovely when Anne and Wentworth finally get together. I'm like, yes, it's
Yes.
wonderful, it's fantastic. So I've been rooting for you. But yeah, there's other stuff in there, and particularly something like Mansfield Park. That's really not a romance. It's doing something. It's doing something I think very different, and more, um, much more interesting, much more challenging. But yeah, romantic it is not.
Yes, and you see this sort of crystal clear analysis of society and women and what's open to women in society and those kinds of things. I have Pride and Prejudice I love. So I was listening to it the other night, and it was when Elizabeth was turning down Mr. Collins. And it becomes more and more a pointed rejection of his assumptions about women in society, and all women want to get married, and you're just playing with me as women do. And it is, I mean, when you just really isolate that one conversation, you can see it's so much more than Elizabeth saying, no, you're too boring. I mean, it's just a whole rejection of that notion. So tell us more about that in some of the romantic. Now, Elizabeth and Mr. Collins are in no way romantic,
Yeah,
but
I was actually talking to another podcaster about a week ago, and I was sort of like I found myself kind of mounting a bit of a defense of Mr. Collins in a way that that I think interestingly his ideas about women, he hasn't just got them, I think, generally from society. I think possibly that what Austen is suggesting that he's got them more specifically from Fordyce. So he reads Fordyce's to young women, which is, as I'm sure many of your listeners will know, is conduct book literature. It's not religious sermons. It's a middle-aged man, rather creepily, teenage girls, how they should behave, and it's just, I mean, it's full of contradictions. They have to be kind of charming and well educated, but not correct men, or be too charming, and they have to like dress well but also not look like they spend any time, but they have to be vain, but like, it's just, you can't, it's basically a sort of, it is impossible to do what what Fordyce wants you to do, and but we know that, I was talking about this kind of how economically Austen can sketch in someone's backstory, right?
mm-hmm.
So with Mr. Collins, we're told that his father is basically awful and illiterate. Right? There's this really interesting kind of, in a book and in a writer who places so much value on reading. Mr. Collins is coming from a home where there aren't any books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so he, in fact, has, although he likes to think he has knowledge of the world, he actually doesn't, because he has read very, very, very little. And he's been to university, but he hasn't really kind of, he hasn't made any good, valuable acquaintance there. And so he hasn't kind of met people who would expand his idea of what the world is, and how things should work. So his knowledge is maybe literally coming from Fordyce's sermons. Like, he's taking his knowledge of women from what to us is an obviously like rampantly misogynistic, illogical, ridiculous book. But it was incredibly popular.
Was
It went through
popular.
edition after edition, like well into the 19th century. People loved it. I mean, I imagine teenage girls at whom it was aimed did not love it. But parents and book buyers and Mr. Collins, this was the way things should be. This was it. This was what you should be. This was the way to behave, and this was your key to unlocking the mysteries of women. And so it's kind of fascinating that I think she's doing with Collins quite a detailed attack on Fordyce, which of course is what Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother of feminism, in her Vindication of the Rights of Women, she goes all in at Fordyce, and she tears him to shreds, basically. I mean, deservedly so. The guy, like, he makes no sense. He doesn't seem to realize how totally, internally inconsistent his arguments are. Um, but yeah, I find it's quite interesting, and I think maybe not a coincidence that Austen and Wollstonecraft are both like, no, Fordyce, no, 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 no. But that they also kind of seem to identify him as the voice of the patriarchy in a way. Like, this is what women are told, and this is what men are told women are, and it's nonsense.
Well, and then it's embodied in Mr. Collins, who comes with these nonsensical ways.
He has these totally nonsensical ideas and tries to put them into action, and he tries to sort of live them, and then discovers that actually, no, that's not how it's going to work.
Right.
So it's kind of it is sort of fascinating that you and so in a way, I guess it's almost a sort of generational debate when Lizzie is rejecting him. She's rejecting not just him, the not particularly attractive, not very bright, although I think quite good natured. I don't think he's unkind. I think he genuinely. This is what I was saying to the other podcast. It's like, actually, he clearly, by offering to marry one of the Bennet daughters, he is also implicitly offering to house their mother and any of the sisters that don't get married. And that's he clearly feels bad about the fact that he's not bad enough not to take it, but
he consciously says to Mrs. Bennet, I am here to, now that my father has died, in that letter to Mr. Bennet, now that my father has died and I won't offend him, I am going to make this good in the one way I see I can. But he does make an honest attempt to make good on that.
He genuinely does try to sort of, make it up to them, basically. And it's not, I think that his absurdity shouldn't necessarily blind us to the fact that he is, and I think maybe Charlotte Lucas isn't going to have the dire marriage that kind of sequel writers often give her, because fundamentally, yes, he's a bit dim, and yes, he's a bit ridiculous, but he is a good man.
Yes, he is kind in his.
Kind. He is. She does in fact. She has in fact been given a quite useful insight into fundamentally who he is and who he wants to be, and so that's she's not going into it quite as blindly as I think readers sometimes imagine that she is. She does have that to work with, but I mean Lizzie is like, sort of forgetting. Well, I mean I suppose in a way that sort of emphasizes where it reveals where Lizzie's mum is coming from. Like, this was a good offer, and this was a good offer that would have meant she wasn't going to be homeless either.
Right.
It's and Lizzie's just thrown it away wantonly without discussing it with anybody. And how could she do this to her sisters, to her mother? Like, it is actually quite a reckless thing. But she had, she doesn't want what he's selling. Basically, she doesn't want the, his kind of kindness is not enough to do away with what I think to Lizzie are the much more serious problems, in that he's not a well-read man, right? And that contrasts him very sharply with Darcy, who it seemed I think it's fairly obvious that we're meant to understand that he's in having been landed with his younger sister look after, he has gone away and read lots of books on how you should bring up young women, but he hasn't read Fordyce. He's gone and read things like Hester Chapone. He's gone and read, which so her she's the author of the exact title, I think it's Letters on the Improvement of the Mind. But he when he talks about how women can improve their minds through it. it looks very much as if it's an explicit reference to Chaperone and to a very different kind of conduct book,
Hmm.
written by women, much more interested in um, educating young women to be happy and secure and self-reliant, rather than just to sort of shape
Yes.
them to male, for male ends and male eyes. And so that's it's almost there's almost this sort of contrast in the text between male authored conduct literature and female authored conduct literature. And so the fact that Lizzie ends up with a man who is willing to listen to what women have to say, and
Right.
read what women have to say is I think, I mean, that also I think is probably not coincidental. Like that's
Yes.
he's Darcy is fundamentally, like, he is a quite conservative character. Like he is conservative, um, but he is open to bringing in a modicum of new information at any rate, and kind of slowly changing his mind on stuff.
And the ability to change his mind, because he
Yes,
does demonstrate,
he does. He does.
even with his interaction with the gardeners, who originally you would think he would say no, different class, but later he comes to very much appreciate. So,
Yeah. I mean, that's a really big kind of political moment in the text. Actually,
yes.
and we sort of there's this tendency kind of recent years to, I think sort of since the 2005 film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, there's been this real tendency to sort of be like, oh, Darcy's just socially awkward. He doesn't know how, like, maybe he's on the spectrum. Maybe he's, like, no. Because we're told specifically that with his tenants he is affable, and affable is able to speak fluently and politely to those who are your social inferiors. That's literally the definition. So that affability is talking down. Um, and so he's always been affable because that's what he was brought up to be. But what he isn't is polite. So he doesn't
Mm.
willing to talk to people who are not obviously his social inferiors in an equal way. He's very that little difference in status is much more
Is
important to
harder.
him than
Yeah.
yeah. And it's hard. It's hard for, and he is. I mean, people underestimate, I think, quite how socially disruptive the guy is. Right?
Yes.
He refuses to be introduced to people, so technically they can't talk to him. Right? They can't converse with him. So, and there are several moments in the text where clearly people are like stuck sitting next to him for half an hour, and then like, okay, I'm just going to say something because this is so awkward now. Um, and then later there's this bit where Mrs. Bennet, she always there's this scene, I think it must be at Netherfield, where she talks to him in this weirdly triangular way, and in the adaptations, that's often played as if, oh, she's just being really rude. I'm like, no, she's trying to follow the rules of polite conduct. Like, so they are not on speaking terms, so she can't speak to him. So she has to say, oh, that gentleman seems to feel that he has to do it in this kind of weirdly triangulated way because he's refused to be introduced to her and her daughters, right? So there, she can't.
So she can talk to Bingley because she's able to talk to
because she's
Bingley.
been introduced to him, right? And he's met her husband, and that's all fine. But she hasn't been introduced to Darcy because he's declined being introduced to any other person, right? And in fact, Lizzie and Darcy are never formally introduced to each other. It never actually happens. They just sort of start conversing, and in a. But yeah, I mean, he causes problems. He causes real social issues, and he's not doing it because he's socially awkward. He's doing it because he is a raging snob, and he thinks he is better than these people, and he does not want to be. He does not want to be obliged to pay them any courtesy. He's like they are beneath him, but not enough. Well, it's like that. There's that quote in there's that bit in Emma, isn't there, where she says, "Oh, obviously they're not. If they were poorer, if they were a degree or two lower, then I might know them. A degree or two higher, and I might deign to like nod at them in the street. But they're, this kind of lowly tenant farmer. He's exactly of a level where I have had nothing to do with him. And like, I'm never going to have anything to do with him because he's just, he is, simultaneously above and beneath my notice. And people love tearing into Emma for being a snob, which she is, but they don't do it to Darcy. And actually, they're very, very similar in
Yes.
in their attitude as to where, who they are and aren't willing to interact with, and where what they think is beneath them, or are worthy of their patronage, and kind of
And Darcy, when we first meet him at that dance, when he said he would not even deign to dance with anyone but Bingley's sisters. That's it. That's the level. That's, you sort of wonder why he went to the dance, but anyway.
I do wonder. It's yes, whether it's just whether he had to be kind of bullied into it by Bingley, whether he's keeping an eye on Bingley. I suspect Bingley may be the kind to sort of fall in love everywhere he goes. He has that vibe. I'm not going to lie. It's but and in fact, I mean, I guess that's sort of it does get suggested at some point that he'll move on.
That it's easy
very quickly.
He'll get over it. So one of the novels we have not really touched on, I'm just sort of keeping track, is Sense and Sensibility, which I think is a real source of Austen looking at things below what we often experience in some of the adaptations. So can we talk about that a little bit, and the money issues and all of those things that are going on?
So there's this fascinating, like, really early review of Sense and Sensibility where the reviewer's like, oh, it's really complicated at the beginning and you get a little lost as to who's related to who and where this money is going. Like, I don't really understand why there's all this information there at the beginning. Like, the information is there because this is the first of many occasions in the novel on which we see women disinherited. Right?
Yeah.
That this is their family. The family of Dashwood had long been established, right? But actually they don't belong to it, right? It's not actually theirs. They don't really. They're not going to get the house. They're not going to get the estate. They're not going to get very much money. And at the first opportunity, they are going to be driven out, basically, which is what happens. It's also, and I used to do this with students. So there's a passage in Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication where she's talking about sensibility, which she's very down on as this sort of like, overly cultivated sensitivity, right? She's like, no, be strong, be strong, be robust, be resilient. Don't kind of open yourself up to always thinking about your emotions and always kind of, being so vulnerable to the world. It's not the way forward. But she's also, and she also talks about how the kind of inequality in normal inheritance. So she's like, so all the children are brought up together, and then the son inherits, and at first he wants to kind of look after his sisters, but then he gets married, and his wife is like, no, they don't belong here. That's not theirs. We need to think about our own children. We need to concentrate on our family's future. And even down to the level of vocabulary choice, Austen in Sense and Sensibility is basically taking that passage very nearly word for word. So it's very, very, very close. I mean, to a degree that I do not think it is possible for it to be coincidental. I think she is deliberately referencing that passage. And it's even down to the kind of descriptions of the cold-hearted wife, and so it's there in both texts. This sort of the money matters so much in all of Austen's novels, but particularly in Sense and Sensibility. It's all any of the characters can think about, right? It's and I mean, people sometimes say, "Oh, how do Austen's characters know how much people are worth?" And I'm like, because people talked about this. You know, when there is a marriage announcement in the newspaper, it quite often said the lady brings a fortune of X amount of money, like right there with like common knowledge. Sort of people clearly kept track of it. Maybe had like little books with wrote it down. But yeah, this sort of obsession with money and inheritance and who's going to get it, and you have a lot of emphasis in the novel on kind of uh, you have um, brother sister sibling pairs,
Mhm.
and you often get to have sort of the two brothers and a sister, and you see how they're treated differently, and it gets done quite like again to an extent that it's almost certainly not coincidence. Um, and you see how the heir gets to have everything, and everything is sort of shuttled towards them, and the younger brother, no one really cares, and then the daughter gonna get married and kind of leave and join another family. She doesn't know. Women don't matter. Um, but I mean, the thing that really fascinates me about Sept and Sensibility, and I find it a very dark novel. I find it every time I read it, I want it to end differently. I mean, I know it's not going to,
Yeah.
but I find both the central relationships, well, the romances, just utterly chilling. Both of them, I think they're
Yes.
dreadful. And I I wonder whether perhaps, I mean, it is an early novel, and it was obviously written originally, we think, in the late 1790s, but it was the first one also that Austen had published. So I think you learn a lot as you start
Right.
getting things into print about what does and doesn't work, and about what you do and don't want to do. And we know we're fairly confident that Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice were both edited down quite a bit from their original length.
Original.
That there was originally quite a lot more of both of them, and kind of subplots and so on. Um, but those the whole relationship. Well, I mean, can you even call it a relationship between Marianne and Colonel Brandon? They are almost never shown talking to one another.
Right.
Don't talk to each other. Colonel Brandon talks to Eleanor, which is why I always want them to get together. I think that's a much more like that. That is the only psychologically healthy option for everybody involved. But
Right.
that's not what Austen wrote. Sadly, she should have done it. Would have been a much better novel. But they've never talked to each other. Basically, they've not really held a conversation. He sort of seems to have this to be sort of psychologically arrested in his mid to late teens when he was in love with his cousin and trying to elope with her. And
Right.
he's like, oh, it's her again. She's back. Your sister looks like her and she acts like her, and this is my chance to redo it. But he's sort of frozen, right? He's never really, I think, got past that whole clearly what was quite a psychologically challenging episode for him. Let's face it. They run off, and then she's
Yes.
taken back and forced to marry his brother, and it's all very and then gets takes a lover and gets divorced, and he finds her kind of dying in the sponging house. And it's all pretty traumatic. Like it's quite you can see how it would give him a bit of an issue. But he's not kind of working out his issue over the course of the novel. He doesn't change, right? He stays in fact in the same position that he was in at the beginning, which is
Hmm.
that he is in love with a teenage girl, and he wants to kind of fix this situation. He's repeating himself. He's not moving on and kind of growing. Essentially, I think is a lot of the reason that I don't like it. Um, but also, um, and this is, I mean, I know a lot of readers of Secret Radical have really hated me for pointing this out. Um, but the reason that Colonel Brandon's dad wanted his cousin to marry his older brother was because she was an heiress. Um, and what happens if you get married without at this point in history, what happens if you get married without a very careful prenup basically being drawn up, is that all your property, the moment you get married, passes to your
Hmm.
husband, right? That you can't,
Right.
as a married woman, own property legally. You don't legally exist, and so you can't own
Right.
anything. And so unless it's held in trust for you, essentially, that's it. It's gone. Um, and so her money has basically all gone to her husband. But then when he dies and Brandon inherits, then surely he still has some of that money. I mean, maybe it's all been spent, but there's, there was her money that vanished into her husband's estate, right? And
Right.
that estate goes to Colonel Brandon. So when he's sort of pluming himself on being like really kind and loving to his cousin's daughter, he's like, oh, I like, aren't I great? I sent her to school and I'm not, casting her out. I'm actually going to, obviously send her away, but look after her and her child. But, what you actually have there is 3 generations of women in a family being disinherited by the Brandon brothers, right? That
Mm-hmm.
there's the money that ought to have been theirs gets transferred over again to male ownership. So this their own family property, just like happens at the beginning with the Dashwood sisters,
Yes.
it basically is stolen from them. And it's not as if Colonel Brandon doesn't seem to be saying, "Oh, look, I really need to save lots of money so that I can give her some of the fortune." Yeah. Her grandmother, or mother and grandmother, I guess, sort of, because we get down to the third generation, don't we? He doesn't say that at all. He doesn't. I mean, where's their house? Where's their, why are they not living in the family estate at the very least? Plenty of people had illegitimate kids, right? It's not unusual at this point. And I mean, certainly through the 18th century, it was kind of very widely tolerated. Um, so long as you looked after them, like no one really cared, right? It was not
Right.
it's not that big a deal. Um, it's so it happens in Pamela, as in Samuel Richardson's Pamela.
Hmm.
Mr. B has an illegitimate daughter, and she is absorbed into the family, and no
Hmm.
one no one thinks any the less of anybody for that happening. Basically, it's expected that her stepmother will just welcome
Well,
her in. Um, and yeah, so he doesn't take her back to the family home, and he doesn't make sure that she's got a fortune, which would at least preserve her from being abandoned, right? At least then someone ran off with her, they'd marry her, right? But he hasn't done that. And he's certainly not maximizing his financial resources, because he hasn't sold the kind of the rectory, the right to serve at the rectory, right?
hmm.
Which he now owns. I mean, he could have sold that and then put the money aside for her, and then she'd. He doesn't seem. It doesn't seem to occur to him at all that maybe morally, if not legally, he really, really ought to be putting something aside for them both, right?
Specifically, yes.
Specifically for them, because his brother stole their family money. Basically, like he took it all. Um, and he doesn't do that. And Marianne, who was so indignant about being stripped of her own family property, being sent away from her own family home, it never seems to cross her mind that she's kind of doing the same thing, right? She's going to live in an estate which has been propped up by another woman's money.
Yes.
And
And it
she
being taken from that other woman's family.
exactly. And she's, that there are some disinherited women there, and she's benefiting from the money that they now don't have, right? But I mean, it's a wonderfully kind of designed beginning and
Hmm.
end to the novel. Actually, that's quite. I think it's kind of fascinating that Austen is in her first published novel managing to do that. Um, But like I said, it's a very kind of concerning novel in lots of ways. And I mean, I think um, Colonel Brandon's glancing association with India as well. That's not. That's not. I mean, obviously now we tend to look at that a little bit askance as a sort of nightmarish kind of way. But actually, at the time, right, there was a lot of hostility to what the East India Company was doing in Britain. Like people were not overjoyed about it. They thought it was Warren Hastings, Governor General of the East India Company, is tried in the House of Commons, right, for crimes that he is alleged to have, I mean, clearly did commit
Mm-hmm.
in India, right? The sort of human rights abuses and like stealing property from women, and it's
Right.
and obviously Austen knows all of this because Warren Hastings is her cousin's godfather, like her cousin Eliza, born in
Mm-hmm.
India. Warren Hastings is her godfather, is very close to her parents, maybe very, very, very close to her mother.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly there were allegations, sort of even at the time, that uh, that cousin Eliza is actually the biological daughter of Warren Hastings. That was suggested at the time, and is still. People sometimes say it as if it's a fact, but we don't really have any idea.
Mm-hmm.
But he was, as a matter of fact, her godfather, and he did certainly look after at least some money for her. Um, and she named her son Hastings after him. In fact, and the baby was born just as the trial was getting going, just after he'd been put on trial in the House of
Oh,
Commons.
okay.
So it was very much really kind of a statement that Eliza was making by doing that. So I mean, Austen knows this. She knows there is a lot of disapproval about what people are getting up to in India, and the ethics of it, the morality of it, um, the very kind of destabilizing effect of having people come back from India with large fortunes that they had made. Um, if there's all, I mean, it's, none of this is clean money, basically. It's varying degrees of grubbiness, but none of it is clean. And so to associate Colonel Brandon with India, to
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, he went out. We're not told how long he went there, and we don't know exactly when the novel is set. But it's not a it, that's not a kind of morally squeaky clean thing. It's not like served in Canada, totally neutral, right? Um, or that imagining that he'd gone and served against Napoleon, which would be heroic, yay. This is of all the things that she's deciding he spent some time doing, that he went out to India, is like, that's not good. It's not good. And it's always kind of interesting that even Willoughby, who is not exactly a shiningly moral light, he clearly disapproves of it. He's like, no, 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 no. Like India
Yeah.
is all riches and corruption, and it's like that's not great. That's not a good. Um, yeah. So it's a very he's not the romantic hero that people try desperately to make him into. He's really not. Um, and I don't think that Austen can have intended him to be, because there's so much in the novel that is disconcerting. You have that little half sentence at the end where Marianne, by the general agreement of all, was to be the reward, and
Uh-huh.
just sort of she's clearly kind of, I mean, not forced, but encouraged in marrying him. And that's very, very different, say, to Pride and Prejudice, where Lizzie Bennet's family is like, hang on, you're doing what? It's gonna be good. Really,
It's all good. It's all good. And you believe
it's
it
all
can
good.
be.
Yeah,
But you're
yeah,
right.
yeah.
There's a lot of pause, even in the final language of Sense and Sensibility. You don't get a warm, fuzzy, these are going to be some great relationships here. that you get with Lizzie and Darcy at the end of Pride and Prejudice, that there are happy years ahead.
There's a lot of there's a lot of kind of um family kind of dissent with
Mhm.
kind of concluding marriages as well, kind of Eleanor and Edward.
Mhm.
No one's happy about them getting married, basically, apart from Eleanor, who,
Right.
I mean, I guess Edward too, but least favorite hero. Can't stand him.
Yeah. And he doesn't really get redeemed, I don't think. He
No,
just kind
no,
of
I
keeps
don't think he does.
wandering, and yeah. It's not like
The,
Darcy where you see a
no,
change.
no, no. You don't see a sort of or Captain Wentworth where he's like, "What's wrong?" Like
Yeah.
basically, I messed up.
And I'm going
I'm
to
going to
own
have
it,
to
and
live
I'm
with
going
the
to, yeah.
knowledge that
Hmm.
I basically took 5 years of happiness away from us. That we could have,
Hmm.
we could have been
Hmm.
together all this time,
Hmm.
and it's my fault that we weren't.
Right. So you can do something with
I have
that.
to own
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so that kind of that sense of sort of and even Mr. Knightley has it a little bit where he's like, I have lectured you as a woman in England could have borne it, right? Sort of, it is there's an acknowledgement of equality, an acknowledgement that they are capable of not behaving perfectly themselves. We, I think, correctly feel indicates that these are couples that can continue to grow together.
Who can keep working
Who
when
can
things.
compromise, who can negotiate, who can here's a
Hmm.
married life, and all the stuff that life is going to throw at you. Whereas with Edmund and Eleanor, Colonel Brandon and Marianne, I'm very much less certain that we are looking or meant to be thinking that we're looking. Perfect happiness. That's a very, very long way out of reach. And I think in Mansfield Park as well. I mean, the
Yeah.
only novel in which she lets her hero and heroine be cousins and get married. She's very resistant to it otherwise, right? She doesn't love the
Yes.
idea.
No.
Interestingly, given that cousin Eliza, as her second marriage, marries Jane's brother Henry, like so. Although they don't have any kids, but yeah, I mean, it's not a she was clearly not a fan.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously, in the 18th century novel, it happens all the time. They love marrying first cousins to each other and kind of more distant cousins to each other. All the time. It's your solution, right?
Yes. It's the
You
family
have to,
solution. Yeah.
yeah.
Keeps everything.
And
Yeah.
it keeps everything. It keeps the money and the property and everything intact, and it keeps the family kind of organized and under control, and keeps it corrects it. Um, but Austen does not like a cousin marriage. She's very resistant to them, except in Mansfield Park, where ends with the married cousins.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, I obviously I think for modern readers in most cultures at any rate, that's quite a lot. Um, but I think even in the novel, it's flagged very very early on that if they're growing up as siblings, if they're being brought up as siblings, that ought to make any like future romantic relationship impossible. But it doesn't, and that is I think Austen kind of does suggest that maybe this is not completely ideal. That maybe Fanny is running away from things.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I thank you so much for it. I have one sort of fun ending question for you.
Okay.
If you could meet Jane Austen for a tea party, and have tea with Jane in celebration of her 250th birthday, what is, let's just say, one question you, or a couple, if you can't think of just one, but what might you like to ask her given the opportunity?
I was thinking about this, and I think I would like to ask her what her favorite one of her own novels was,
Oh,
because
great.
I think that would be a really I think it would be very revealing.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Okay. That's a good one. What does she love best?
Yeah.
Now, let's use that to segue into the next book of yours, because we're talking about books, and I'm not going to ask you to choose your favorite of your two, but tell us about this beauty.
So this is, I feel I can say this because the actual the beatitude beauty, is all to do with the book designers and the illustrators and the it has so many pictures in. It must have been so difficult to set. But yeah, it is genuinely a really beautiful book. It comes out in 6 weeks' time. And yeah, so I'll hold up the contents page so
Isn't that beautiful?
What it talks about. And they've got these beautiful little illustrations. So yeah, it's sort of it's kind of a mixture in a way. So it's got a little bit about Austen's life and family, and it's got lots of kind of historical context on sort of the army and the navy and the education of women and places. So kind of estates that Austen knew and visited, and that might be kind of inspiring the ones in her novels. The cities and towns that she knew, seaside resorts that she went to. And then later on, it moves on to look at sort of the legacy. So Austen through the kind of rest of the 19th century, into the 20th century, and right up to now. So talk about lots of all the adaptations, and so down to things like Sanditon and Bridgerton, and yeah, all the some of the crazier ones that have come out in the last few years. But yeah, so it's a sort of it's intended as a celebration of Austen. I think and I think there'll be something new, even if you know and love your Austen really well. I think you will find some new stuff in here. But also, if someone in your life loves Jane Austen, can I suggest this as a present for them? Because I think you'd love it.
Yes, it is gorgeous. It is gorgeous.
It's a really beautiful book, I have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously all my books are beautiful.
Yes. But physically, this is especially beautiful, right? Yeah. So I did want to end with that, so we all have something more to look forward to buy ourselves as a gift and others. So I can't buy too many, right? Well, thank you so much, Helena, for joining us, for diving into the radical views of Austen and how she was not just accepting the world as she saw it. She was revealing some things, calling our attention and her readers at the time, who would have been even more aware of how she's taking on some of the assumptions that were shaping the world and wanting to reshape it. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been just wonderful.
I had a great time.
Oh, good. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And join us again soon on Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. A big shout out and thank you to Dr. Helena Kelly, and also to all of you for joining us. I hope you've had a great summer. I've so enjoyed these summer specials. I'm grateful to my patrons and to all of the listeners and all of you who have helped us look at how history shows us what's possible. Can't wait for season 6 to share it with you. Thank you.